Welcome back to our panel discussion, Mitigating Insider Threats in Virtual and Cloud Environments, sponsored by HITRUST and Carahsoft, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Eric Chu, he's the co-founder and president of HITRUST, Gary Buchanan, chief of the Risk Management Division at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Tom Baer is the CIO at the Securities and Exchange Commission. John Skidlarek is the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the FCC, and Bill Lay, the Deputy CIO for Information Assurance and Chief Information Security Officer at the State Department. And Eric, before we left off, we were talking about the idea of continuous monitoring, especially in virtual environments. What are your thoughts on whether agencies are where they should be with respect to continuous monitoring, especially in environments that are largely virtualized? And what are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, definitely. And continuous monitoring is a big initiative among every government customer we speak with. And it's really beyond the networking and patching data that a lot of companies historically have focused on. And really, it's for any critical system that's running in the environment. And virtualization is probably one of the most critical systems because everything runs on top of it. And really, if you look at today's threat, it's coming from the inside, right? Insider threats are the number one cause of breaches today. And that's not just employees, right, that look to do harm or malicious actions, but also for outside attackers that are very much using insider threats. They're stealing credentials, right? They're gaining access to the inside. And things like perimeter firewalls aren't stopping that, and network monitoring doesn't help in that situation as well. And so having the right actionable data coming from those critical infrastructure components, right, to make sure you understand what your administrators, what your employers are doing and can compare that against what they should be doing becomes absolutely critical. And HITRUST is funded by In-Q-Tel. And one of the things that we've been doing for the intelligence community is building reports and actionable data that meets the 800-53 and the ICD 503 requirements, and specifically around some of the data that Gary mentioned in terms of the virtualization-specific information that's required in Rev 4.
Okay, so that idea of insider threats and the data that can kind of give you information about that. Bill, I wanted to start with you because, State Department in a very real way is engaged on the front lines of defense of the United States, even if it doesn't have the military hardware. But, the Secretary of State is going around and dealing with some tough customers and talking to them and at them around the world. So I imagine you must be extra vigilant these days, because of the State Department's social media footprint and also just the regular data that you have to support embassies and consulates around the world. So how do you distinguish insider threats from external threats, or is it all one big blob?
It would be easy if it was one big blob, but we really have to look at it based on our mission and program needs. We run everything from what we call American corners at the embassies and consulates around the world, where we're trying to be very open and show the rest of the world what America is all about. And so that's a very public-facing, outbound type of interface where we want to be very welcoming. And we run everything to, again, passport and visa production, which we really want to control very tightly because those are the source documents that drive authentication for all Americans. So as far as a risk posture goes, we run the entire gamut, and this is all just on the unclassified side. For insider threat, it's very difficult. As Eric said, once you're on the network, everybody looks the same. Insider threat really boils down to monitoring behavior, heuristics, finding out does something look askew or out of the ordinary that warrants closer attention. And when you're talking easily terabytes per day of data traffic, if you had just a needle in a haystack, that would be a simpler problem. So our struggle is to tie all the information, all the feeds, the speeds from our sensors into a pool of information that can be filtered and boiled down into actionable information. So our administrators, our investigators have something to work with where they don't feel like they're boiling the ocean. It poses a huge problem. Right now, just for continuous diagnostics and mitigation, we're looking at roughly having to filter well over 2 terabytes of information per day. So if we want to do trending over a year, we're looking at basically a petabyte database. That's huge big data, and that's a new frontier for cybersecurity experts. So it really becomes a big data issue that we have to overcome.
Okay, yeah. So let me get John at the FCC your perspective on that. Do you distinguish between insider and external threats, or is it kind of the same deal? Once they're in, so they look alike, or is there something special that you do for employees or contractors to make sure that they stay on the up and up?
Well, naturally, we have normal personnel security controls, and we try to. We, in fact, do vet all of our employees and our contractors who support us. We do have a number of tools that we can use to, again, as I said, look at the network, look for anomalous behavior. And the key is always not being overcome by the data, but ensuring that you've got some way to draw the appropriate inferences out of it. The other thing, going back to 853, of course, is there are a number of controls, even as they relate to, employees, access control, passwords, authentication, that if they're properly followed based on the criticality of the data and the sensitivity of the system, certainly take you a long way towards being secure. A lot of times, while it's true insiders are now a significant threat, the other significant threat is where you weren't following basic standard security protocols that you should have been following in the first place. So one of the things that we're taking a hard look at is, are we doing the right things? And I think that, by itself is as simple as that sounds, can take you a long way towards security. And naturally differentiating between potentially internal threats and external. Like I said, we, in the case of Open Internet, so far we've received over 1 million comments. And, a lot of people have a lot of very interesting things to say. And when you get that kind of interest in your systems and you have such divisive viewpoints, it can lead to behaviors on the part of your external stakeholders that require careful monitoring.
Yeah, so people can get a little intemperate, I guess, when maybe they're commenting on something, a volatile issue. Is that,
or the way that they may choose to come at our systems? Some are friendlier than others.
Wow. Okay, so people do shoot the messenger. In other words.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
All right, good. And NGIA, again, highly secure. You have insiders that are smart to begin with, and they're kind of computer nerds, many of them to begin with.
Certainly.
So what are the special challenges there from the inside?
So interestingly enough, insider threat is nothing new. We've been talking about insider threat for 25, 30 years. How long have we had spies, right? They've been around forever. Recent things that have gone on in the federal government, we're looking a little bit harder at it. But the tools that NGA and other agencies and everyone have used for years haven't changed that much either. If I go back in my experience 15 years ago, we had security logs on all of our servers. When somebody authenticated to them, they logged in, they logged out. When somebody tried to log in who wasn't supposed to, when people tried to elevate their privileges. But it was different then because it was one server, one piece of hardware. It was bare metal. As we move to virtualization, that changes a lot. We now have the capability for system administrators to elevate privileges, create and delete hundreds, if not thousands, of servers in a click of a button. And so really that changes the posture of our insider threat detection. So what's changed with NGA is we are separating our external threats from our internal threats. It's no longer a matter of John Doe was trying to log in, he logged in 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for the last year, and now he's logging in at midnight. So that used to be a tip, right, that something's different with this particular employee. Now we're looking at more heuristics and more why are people saying certain words. There's key words that bring up tools that we may, record a session or see what that person is doing for a limited basis to see if they're in fact a nefarious employee or just part of their normal job.
Sure, everybody knows that everybody's looking to see who logs in at midnight these days. That's kind of like, we know they're going to be checking for that one, so what I'm going to do, I'll do at lunchtime instead of in the middle of the night. And of course, the SEC has the whole insider trading issue, which is equally applies to people, coming at the SEC and to your own employees who have privileged information. So, do they? Is it a midnight checking type of thing, or what are the special techniques you have toward what might be construed as insider threats?
So we pride ourselves on the fact that our staff works 7 days a week and sometimes at midnight, and so there are legitimate uses for our systems, and we certainly make them available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We use heuristics. We also use data loss prevention capabilities in order to check where the data is going and how it's being used, and is there a pattern that is being established, and is that pattern different than what it has been previously by that particular employee? That, coupled with the fact that, as John mentioned previously, we need to make sure that we do the basic blocking and tackling of managing permissions to systems, databases, and other things like that. Once you do that, I think that if you pair heuristics with data loss prevention, with the basic blocking and tackling that is required, I think that you will have a fairly secure program. It requires us to spend more time monitoring and understanding the logs and what's happening. And my concern is that federal agencies don't always get the opportunity to invest in checking what's happening from an erratic perspective. And that investment takes time, and it takes a lot of effort in order to maintain.
Okay, Eric, I wanted to ask you about why in some cases it's easier to do damage in virtualized environments. That seems counterintuitive, because if you have one server and, say, a backup server that are dedicated to an application, you know where it is, and someone could, zap it. With virtual machines, you may have many, many instances scattered across time zones and machines, and yet it's vulnerable in a different way. Explain that.
Yeah, so what's ended up happening with the advent of virtualization and now hybrid and public clouds is that you've essentially put another layer under what you thought of as physical infrastructure, right? You thought that you had physical servers, physical networks, physical storage devices. And if you had an insider threat, maybe, as Gary mentioned, you can affect that one physical box, right? Or take out that one switch. Now that you're running everything on virtual infrastructure, well, now as virtual admin, I can copy every virtual machine in the environment. I could put it on my laptop. I could sell it to a competitor or to a foreign government. I could delete a virtual machine, right? Something critical that runs some part of the organization or the agency's mission. Or, frankly, I could run a script and delete everything. And we saw recently a couple of examples. One is Amazon with Codespaces, a company that ran its business in Amazon, had an outside attacker, right, that was able to not only launch a DDoS attack, but gain control over their Amazon management account. And when that company didn't pay, that outside attacker deleted everything in EC2, everything in S3 storage, and that company was out of business the next day. There's another example that of a top 5 bank that recently had an insider incident, and they reevaluated what different administrators could do based on their privilege levels, and they determined that the virtualization admin was the most dangerous and could potentially take down the bank with the right script, meaning that IT administrator could run a script that deleted every virtual machine, right, of that top bank. Now, that's a scary situation, and in the physical world, you would never be able to do that because you only had credentials to a limited number of systems. You couldn't run, and you wouldn't have credentials on the system that ran everything, right? So it's that concentration of risk, given that you have now virtualized all that functionality and collapsed it all onto that single software layer. And virtual machines are just a set of files now.
Okay, did you all know that? I guess you did. So, John, tell us how you mitigate that. What are some of the ways you make sure that that one virtual administrator can't, push that button and there goes the FCC?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to basic controls, and there are things that we did in the physical world, like two-party control, that I think still come into play. Well, one advantage that we have is that we're relatively small, and I don't know if this resonates or not, but we tend to know all of our folks pretty well. We're not so big that we scale in such a way that we don't know who we're working with, and we've had some longtime partners and partnerships. Now, I can't tell you that doesn't mean you won't get a bad apple in the door, but I think that we don't have necessarily the same scale and dispersion issues that maybe some of our other brother and sister agencies would have in the federal government. As we move towards cloud, because I told you earlier where we are. I mean, where we're going is we're going to the cloud, and we're going relatively soon. We know that's the right thing to do for all the reasons that we talked about, and I think one of the key aspects there is ensuring that you pick the right provider. That they've got appropriate security controls in place, that you're able to negotiate those good SLAs. And I would say there, I would probably want to be somewhere near leading edge, but not necessarily bleeding edge, because you'd like somebody that's got a track record. And honestly, no, I didn't know that story about Amazon, and I'm sure they're not too pleased. Nor was the company that went out of business. But I mean, I would like to think that dealing with the right provider and having the right controls would take us a long way there as we move forward.
All right, we'll explore that more, but first we're going to take a short break. Our guests today are John Skidlarek. He's Deputy Chief Information Officer at the FCC. Tom Bayer is the CIO at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Gary Buchanan, Chief of the Risk Management Division at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Eric Chu, Co-founder and President of HITRUST. And Bill Lay, Deputy Chief Information Officer for Information Assurance and the Chief Information Security Officer at the State Department. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Mitigating Insider Threats in Virtual and Cloud Environments, sponsored by HITRUST and Carahsoft here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.